Nothing quite like the smoothness of a good Earl Grey. Welcome to my home, welcome to a new video. To those of you new here, I'm Radu, a street photographer from Romania, and I make videos on the YouTubes. Today, something a bit special. We're going to do an AMA. A little housekeeping first. Kindly consider supporting my work here if you find it enjoyable or otherwise worthwhile. Liking this video is by far the most helpful thing you can do. It helps a lot with the algorithm. Subscribe down below, press the bell in order to be notified of future uploads. There's also buy me a coffee and a PayPal link down below if you're feeling generous and you want to throw a buck or two down my way. Certainly appreciated. And all that jazz out of the way, let's start answering questions. First up is a question from Matt Hazenbrink 4888. Hopefully I got that right, Matt. If not, sorry. He asks, Ciao Radu, what is your post-processing workflow? What software do you use? Now, I will very soon, hopefully, make an in-depth video where I go through my entire workflow, starting from ingesting the images and the way I structure my archive, post-processing workflow, the software I use and whatnot. But until then, I will just briefly mention that I have been using raw therapy for coming on to 4 or 5 years now. It's my software of choice. I have dabbled in Darktable very, very briefly, but I feel like you need a PhD in order to be able to use that software, so I quickly gave up. I just find it unnecessarily obtuse and complicated. Raw therapy can also seem a bit daunting and intimidating at first, but once you realize there are multiple ways of achieving the same result and redundancy to redundancy, and that is to say that there are tools that you will probably never ever need to use, and it's perfectly fine if you just use a quarter of the tools available, as do I. You will quickly learn that raw therapy isn't all that difficult. There's your usual contrast and sharpness and the curves and the saturation and vibrance, but there's also really a fair bit of very scientific, I would like to say, very complicated and complex tools I don't really use all that much, like Retinex and wavelets and stuff I don't practically ever need, so I don't ever use. I use GIMP every now and then because I feel like it does somewhat of a better job in sharpening than raw therapy does. And also because raw therapy lacks any way to add grain and noise to my images, and when I did post-process all my RAWs, I used to always add a bit of noise at the end of the pipeline. Now, I said did, I use past tense because this is all back when I was using Sony and shooting RAWs. Nowadays, I am still using RAWs. Thanks to the dual card slot on the X-T2, I am shooting on 2 cards at once. One houses RAWs and one houses JPEGs. Now, the RAWs are there just for that Hail Mary when all else goes wrong and I need the RAW to recover highlights or shadows in a very difficult scene. But most often than not, I would say 99% of the times, I will just use the JPEGs. I have begun practicing a bit of a JPEG workflow. Now, again, the RAWs are there for emergency purposes, or let's say if I get a client job and I really do need to strive for close to perfection and the best of the best image quality, I will probably go and edit the RAWs. But for my stuff, even my serious portfolio stuff, I have become so enamored with the way the Fuji handles colors and does its JPEGs that I wholeheartedly trust it, and I practically just shoot JPEGs and post them, and most often than not, I don't even keep the RAWs. Len Philpott is a bit of a wise guy. He asks, what's the airspeed velocity of an Unladen? And yeah, I didn't know this. I really had to Google this because it's apparently a Monty Python reference, and I'm supposed to say, what do you mean, an African or an European swallow? Yeah, this is lost on me. I'm not into British humor all that much, although I do love me some Mr. Bean. And I used to love Benny Hill. I used to love him as a child, really, man. God bless his soul. So yeah, yes, wise guy. Then Len, probably feeling remorseful, comes back with a serious question. I don't know if you do landscape photography, but if so, how does your street photography inform your landscape approach? Is it still black and white? Now, Len is apparently a little behind with the news. He probably... Now, in all fairness, I seem to have created a bit of a reputation as a black and white shooter, and that's perfectly fine. I did love me some black and white photography, and fair enough, I used to shoot practically exclusively black and white, but ever since July, when I got the Fuji, I started shooting color, so yeah, there's that. As far as landscape photography, now, I'm not a landscape photographer by any stretch of the imagination. However, just like the next person is, I also am easily moved and impressed by a beautiful sunset or a lovely sunrise or a great vista, even an urban vista. And if I have the camera on me, I will take a landscape photo. That's not going into my portfolio. It's not what I consider my serious artsy stuff, but I love photography. I love pretty things, and a beautiful sunset or a sunrise or anything of the sort is certainly beautiful. I will capture it. Now, the way street photography informs this is in the way that I try to go back to the stuff I do in my street photography, and that is to say, I keep track of my composition and exposure. But other than that, there's a little parallel between these two genres as far as I'm concerned, because while I have studied street photography, and certainly not probably much better than mediocre at it, as far as landscape photography goes, I'm pretty naive and a novice. I have been known to shoot some astro landscapes, and I love the technical side of it, processing the data and stacking the stuff, and the surprise at the end when I'm faced with the resulting image. But it's something I do very seldom, and not something I do seriously. It's more so than not to capture a memory. And no, it's usually color. I also used to do a lot of macro back in the day, and I used to be of the opinion that if black and white works perfectly fine for street photography, I used to think it's better, it's a preferred way of shooting street photography, probably not so much anymore. However, if we're speaking about macro and landscape, I felt like color is pretty much mandatory. Now, I can easily think of Ansel Adams, springs to mind, who did fantastic black and white landscape. But more often than not, I feel like a landscape needs to be in color. Now, Carl asks, what's the difference between a fish, another wise guy, huh? This reminds me of a Romanian dry joke, which goes something like, what's the difference between a chicken? And the answer would be something like, both its feet are of equal length, especially the left one. Chicken, fish. Yeah. Then he's coming back with a second question that says, who are you and how did you get in here? Now, the way I got in here is by the magic of the interwebs and the YouTubes. And it's because you clicked on the video with my face and hopefully still watching. And who I am? I'm Radu. Supposing this is a serious question, I'm going to go for a serious answer. I'm Radu. I'm 40 years old. I'm from Romania. I'm a street photographer. I'm a print repair guy in real life. I'm a husband. I'm a father. And bit of a beer aficionado, if you will. Ugly bearded guy. That's pretty much who I am. Yeah, I love me some Linux and open source software. Moving on, Martin Scharnke, hopefully I didn't butcher your name, asks, or rather says, hi Radu, I have frequently appreciated your wonderful photographs, the value put on a good beer and your reviews. You're asking for questions, here's one. How can I get the UV filter off my best lens? It's a 150 to 600 mm Sigma that I use for wildlife photography and has a 95 mm thread diameter. Oh boy, that's a large front element. 95 mm, that's like yay big. I don't want to resort to Adam Savage's bandsaw solution. Yeah, I wouldn't either. He takes a rather brute force approach, which admittedly does work, but the way I would do this, now I have never been in this situation because honestly I never use filters. I have used an ND filter once or twice when doing long exposure street photography or landscapes or whatnot, but I don't ever use UV filters and the such. So all that I'm saying here is not my own experience, it's some internet knowledge I stumbled across during my perusing of forums and discussion threads and whatnot. People suggest taking either a mouse pad with its rubbery face up, firmly pressing the lens onto with the filter side onto the mouse pad and yet again firmly twisting. That should supposedly loosen the filter. Lacking a mouse pad, a very flat and clean rubber shoe sole could do the stuff. Try wearing latex gloves and turning the filter that way. People have also suggested putting rubber bands around the filter thread, the filter itself, I mean, and using that for added friction. Hopefully you'll have managed to get it off your lens by now, but if not, hopefully this helps. And also, thank you very much for your compliments. It means a lot to know that people enjoy the stuff I do. Moving on, whatever was D asks, is there a place you really wish you could go for some time to photograph things and people? I mean, a place that you would think would make for good photographs. Now, in that regard, I'm really easy to please, because now, of course, I would love if someone out of the blue came to me and said, here's an all expenses paid trip to Kuala Lumpur or Hong Kong or Tokyo or India or whatever the place may be. I would love to go there and photograph. And that is to say that I'm really easy to please, and I would practically like to go anywhere. While I do love Arad, my hometown, I still find ways to enjoy photographing people and the street here. I know it really well, and once or twice it seemed like it felt boring. But that is not to say I'm not enjoying shooting here, because I am. But if I were to go someplace, I don't know, man, I would love to shoot in New York. But then again, I would love to shoot in Timișoara next door. I would love to shoot in Bucharest, the capital of our country. I would love to go practically anywhere. Iceland, really great. I would love to do some landscape photography in Iceland. I would really love to go for the aurora and see those thermal bath lakes thingies they have there. I would really love to visit Cuba or South Africa, although that may seem a bit of a dangerous place to go right now, South Africa. I'm a sucker for desert scenery, and I would love to shoot in Morocco or Egypt or anywhere in Africa. So if there's any kind stranger that's considering sponsoring a trip, anywhere will do. Anywhere will do. Steven Regular says, here's one that I've been wondering about recently. Might not be applicable though. If you're a musician of any kind or even a keen listener, how much of the photographic creative process overlaps with creating music? Sorry if it's too vague or not relevant, but genuinely curious. Now, not so much anymore, but I was really big into music all throughout my 20s. And that's to mean starting at 20 and right up until 30, I think. I was a DJ, an electronic music producer. I played music at raves, I made my own music. Some of that is still available on the internet. You detective types go and look for it. But ever since I gave up making music, I very slowly began losing my interest in music. A few years back, I co-produced a heavy metal radio show, and had a blast doing that. I'm really big into hard rock and metal of the extreme kind. I'm loving Opeth. I'm loving recently discovered Pain of Salvation. I'm also loving me some classic Uriah Heep and the Beatles, but Gojira is great. Mastodon, I'm amazing. But that's besides the point. Steven, was it? Steven asked if how much of the photographic creative process overlaps with creating music. Now, I'm not a musician of any kind. Even if I was still to be making electronic music, I don't think I could call myself a musician, because I think like a musician plays an actual instrument, like a guitar, or a piano, or a violin, or yeah, but DJs and electronic music producers are just button pushers. That is not to offend anyone, sorry if it has, but I think this is wildly besides the point. I think like people lack a bit of humility. People very easily call themselves musicians and photographers. I should know, right? But yeah, the way these two things inform each other, is there a way? I find them to be very different in the way they approach the artistic creation process. On the one hand, music is, I find something very solitary. Even if you're not alone and you're a musician practicing or making music with a band, it's still you, or you as in plural, your band, in your rehearsal room, in your studio, in your bubble, making music. Now, there is something to be said about the performance part of it when you're sharing your music with audiences, but if we're speaking about the creation process, I feel like it's a very solitary thing to do, to make music. However, making photographs is something that, especially street photographs, I think it's something that necessarily means you take part in the world. You are of the world, because you need to walk the streets, you inevitably meet people, sometimes you may even strike a conversation with those people, and you're there. You're smelling the smells, you're seeing the sights, you're hearing the sounds, you're very much part of the scenery, you're very much part of the very thing that eventually becomes your art. And from that point of view, I feel like making music and making photographs are two very different things. Now, you could easily turn to cliches and say that photography is visual poetry and yada, yada, yada. But in the way you approach the actual making, I think they're very different. But that's just my opinion. Mart Bats has 4 questions. First up, which piece of photography equipment do you regret purchasing the most and why? Now, I have thought about this, and I don't really have anything that I regret buying. First of all, because not having a lot of money to invest into this means I need to really study and really look into things. I am considering buying them before actually spending the cash. And also because I enjoy it. Every time I want to buy something new, I go on the internet and I read up dozens of reviews, I watch dozens of videos, and by the time I've made a decision, it's usually a very informed decision, taking into consideration my budget, my needs, and one thing does come to mind. It's not necessarily a regret, because I easily returned the thing, but it's something that I didn't end up keeping, and it was the Sigma DGDN Contemporary 45mm f2.8 E-mount. Man, that's a mouthful. But back when I was still shooting full frame and Sony, I thought I would try to go for an autofocus lens, and there was something about that lens that really fit with my way of shooting, and really was a lot of things that I wanted in a lens. It was all metal, it was really well built, it had a dedicated aperture ring, which I nowadays almost feel like a must. I don't really intend to buy, I'm not really considering any lenses that don't have an aperture ring. I've been spoiled that way by vintage lenses. I feel like an aperture ring is a must on a lens. I much prefer turning an aperture ring rather than a dial to set my aperture. But I returned that lens very soon after buying it. Now, and that also has to do with the ergonomics of a Sony camera, because while still small, it was slightly larger than my usual vintage lenses, and together with the A7R II made for very little space for my fingers between the grip and the lens itself, and it was a bit uncomfortable. Also, the lens didn't really perform all that well up close, and I felt like that money was going to be better spent on something else. Don't even remember what I got instead of that, but I returned it just a few days after buying it, and except for that, I don't really have purchases that I regret. I don't buy all that much gear to begin with. Right now, I have a single body and just 2 lenses. I have access to a few vintage lenses my wife still has, because my own I sold all of them, but other than that, I have the Osmo Pocket, that was a weird pronunciation, the Osmo Pocket, the first one, which is practically my go-to YouTube camera. It's what has been shooting all my videos in the last year. Lovely little camera. I am considering the, as of yet, unlaunched Osmo Pocket 3, but that's supposed to be kind of expensive, so I'll probably stick with this some more. I don't have a lot of gear. The tripod, I use a $20 lavalier mic. I use this for sound. This is the Zoom H1, very ancient, missing the battery cover here, but otherwise in pretty fantastic working condition. I'm a bit frugal in a way, I would say, because and that is bringing me to my budget, because if I had money lying around, I would certainly be upgrading my camera, upgrading this, upgrading that, but I would be doing that because of want and not need, because I'm certainly happy with my X-T2, certainly happy with the Osmo Pocket, certainly happy with what I have, and they get the job done pretty damn good. Moving on, if a subject spotted you taking a candid photo of them on the street and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" what would you say to them? Now, this has happened a few times, and the way I shoot is something like, let me put it this way, I would rather, and I prefer, apologizing instead of asking for permission. So inevitably, shooting without asking for permission will make people discontent, let's say, sometimes even mad. And I usually just straight up tell them what has attracted me to that particular image. I would say you have a nice hat. I would say you look nice. I would say you're beautiful. I would say it was an interesting scene. I would say I love the light falls and lights your eyes. I don't know. I would just tell them the truth. And 9 times out of 10, this will de-escalate things and people will just go, oh, okay, fine. When it doesn't work out like that, I will explain furthermore that I'm a photographer, that I'm documenting life on the streets, but I usually prefer to give as little of an explanation as possible, and I usually prefer not to be asked in the first place, because I feel like I just want to take the picture and not even be seen. I just like ninja mode. Don't want to disturb people, but when I am confronted and asked, I will just tell people the truth. Now, there have been very, very rare occasions when people were really upset. One of those occasions was, of all things, involving cops, and that was a pretty ugly situation. They were kind of aggressive, and I'd rather not get into the details of that, but usually people don't seem to care all that much, and those that do eventually end up actually enjoying the fact that I took their picture. Now, I also try to be as friendly as possible. I smile to people, I nod, I wave, I say hello. A lot of times I say thank you after taking a picture. I try to not be intimidating. I'm not sure the face helps. Yeah, I try to be as friendly as I possibly can, so it usually works. Question number 3 from Mart. Did I say Matt? I'm sorry. Mart. Or is it Matt? I'm not sure. I have this list here and hopefully I got the name right. If not, sorry. Question number 3. If you could go back in time, which historic event would you like to photograph the most? Oh boy, this is a tough one. Now, how far back in time are we talking? Like way back when people invented fire? Sure, I'd love to photograph that. Way back when Christ was crucified. Bit of a sensitive subject, but probably the most important event in all of human history. Sure, I'd love to have photos of that, but is that a bit of blasphemy? So, may God forgive me. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure because any important event in human history deserves to be documented. And I'm really not sure what I would choose here. Okay, one thing comes to mind. We had, in 1989, we had, they call it a revolution. Some people, the conspiracy types, claim it was a coup d'etat. Some people say it was neither, but we call it the 1989 revolution, when we as people overturned the communist regime. I would certainly have liked to be able to photograph that. Probably, yeah. I was 6 back then, so yeah. I still remember hearing the shots. I was at my parents' house, which is about 20 kilometers outside the city, and I heard shots. I heard gunfire. As little as I was, it was a bit scary. What other event would I like to photograph? Past event. I think this is it. Recent history. Probably the 1989 Romanian Revolution. Moving on, question number 4. And this goes back to Todd Pryor's question. If someone offered you an all-expenses-paid trip to do street photography anywhere in the world, where would you choose to go and why? Shibuya Square comes to mind just because I'm a sucker for this cyberpunk, steampunk, not really steampunk, but the cyberpunk futuristic vibes Tokyo has at night, and I would love to photograph that, all those neon lights. I would also love to photograph pretty much any rural part of the world, like Vietnam. Yeah, man. China, India. The American Midwest or the Southwest. Pretty much Alaska. I would love to photograph Alaska. And yet again, I'm a sucker for a desert, so I would really like to photograph Morocco or Egypt or the tribes in Central Sahara. Yet again, I'm very easy to please, so I would practically go anywhere. Anywhere that's new, I think that would be great. Paul, 87, asks, did you receive any backlash from viewers, friends, or other photographers after you left the vintage lens community? Two-part question. Do you see APS-C as a big inconvenience when shooting with a vintage lens? Well, Paul, let me address the first part of your two-part question regarding backlash from viewers. Now, I'm not nearly as famous or important in order to have so big of a following that people get mad or give backlash because of what I choose to shoot. So the answer is no, decidedly. Nobody cares what I shoot. I'm not even sure people that watch my videos care what I shoot, but I like talking about stuff, so hopefully you find this enjoyable. But no, nothing in the way of backlash, not even in the slightest. Second part, if APS-C is a big inconvenience when shooting with a vintage lens. Short answer, yes. Long answer, still yes, but with a caveat. Let me explain. Now, one reason why I used to shoot vintage lenses was because of cost. That aside, they are very cheap and easily available. Very cheap meant I could afford them. That aside, I also shot vintage lenses for all that time because I love the character of the image. Now, that's true because vintage lenses, especially when shot on high-resolution digital sensors, exhibit a lot of optical imperfections, be it heavy vignetting, be it swirls, be it aberrations, and astigmatism and geometric distortions. Things like this render images that look beautiful, if you're asking me. I really, really love, and sometimes I do miss that look. It's charming. It's almost magical. It's really beautiful, and especially if we're talking about street photography, I think it fits the genre well. The kind of street photography I shoot, it gives images a more honest feel, a raw, really raw kind of visual language. I think it suits the genre very well. So that character is usually on the far sides of the image circle, because if you're putting a vintage lens on an APS-C crop sensor, you're just getting the middle part. And yeah, that is usually the better part of the lens, the better corrected, the better sharpness, the better resolution, the better everything. But if you're going for good and better and best, you're practically shooting vintage lenses for all the wrong reasons. Just go get yourself a modern lens and you've got a good image. But if you're shooting for the character, if you're shooting for the charm and the magic, you really do need to shoot on full frame. I feel like shooting vintage lenses on anything other than full frame is missing the point entirely. And I don't necessarily recommend it. With a caveat, and that is when shooting macro, because on the one hand, you're getting a bit of an extra reach when shooting APS-C because of the difference in field of view, and you're also getting just the center part of the lens, which is the sharpest, the best corrected, the best part of the lens. So it's the best of both worlds. Cheap, easily available, and when shooting macro, you need resolution, you need good geometrics, you need sharpness, you need a pretty pristine image that way. So yeah, it's the caveat I mentioned earlier. Macro photography makes a lot of sense on APS-C crop sensors. Our penultimate question comes from Gord. Have you noticed any creative differences in your work since you switched to Fuji? Well, the obvious one is that I'm shooting color. And other than that, I feel it's not really a creative difference, but I'm certainly getting more keepers. Autofocus can do that. It's certainly faster than I was at manual focusing. And I'm getting more keepers with autofocus. Now, other than that, not a lot has changed in the way I shoot from a creative point of view, because I approach street photography much in the same way. I am able to be a bit more fluid and dynamic because autofocus means I can take shots I couldn't back when I was shooting manual. But other than that, I no longer post-process my images. I just download the JPEGs off of my SD card and plop them onto my Instagram, my Facebook, or just keep them on my hard drive. One other thing has happened. It would appear that getting a new camera can help as far as restarting or getting your creative juices flowing, because I feel like I like photography more. I feel like I like taking pictures more than I did before. I feel like I'm taking pictures of random things, pictures I would not necessarily take before, because I feel like I'm a bit more inspired with a Fuji. I'm certainly loving the handling of the camera more than I did with a Sony, so that translates into more pictures. Finally, Spider Monkey asks, have you had a period when you struggled to motivate yourself to take photos, and what did you do to get yourself taking shots again? You may have already covered this elsewhere. And I have. Is it this corner? I never get it right. Or is it this corner? You'll find the link here. Now, I did cover this in a video I did recently called I've Been Stuck, something like that, where I talk about this very thing. And what has helped me was definitely getting a new camera, like I touched upon before. it certainly sparked my interest in photography more than anything else I thought of doing. But on the one hand, that's on the one hand. On the other, I'm the kind of person that doesn't function well when forced or when I feel like I have to do something. So forcing myself to go out shooting doesn't usually work. I have been known to make a picture or two when I did try to go out when I didn't feel like it, but usually I just kind of have to wait it out, and just kind of wait for things to settle in my life or in my brain, or why not both, and just things seem to kind of settle, and it's cyclical as far as I'm concerned. There are periods when I don't feel like taking photos. There are periods when I feel very, very uninspired and really not creative at all. And the best thing to do, I think, for me, is just to wait it out. I have tried reading self-motivating articles and watching videos on the matter, and more often than not, that just kind of adds to the guilt I already have, because I'm a very creative person, and when a long time passes and I've not done anything, I start to feel creatively depressed. And together with this comes a feeling of guilt, a sense of missing out on time, because we have little time on this planet, and it doesn't serve me well to force myself into anything. It doesn't serve me well to try to force creativity, so I just kind of have to let it settle, and usually creativity will come back, oftentimes with a vengeance and a very, very strong drive to do things. And it's true, buying a new camera certainly helps. At least it did for me. I still feel like I'm very, very eager to grab the Fuji and go out shooting. Sadly, because of my new responsibilities, and that is to say that raising a child certainly cuts into your free time, and that leaves me with very little of it. But the little I do still have, I enjoy shooting, and I'm considering a Fuji X-T3 or an upgrade to the X-T3. Yeah, don't tell the wife. That has been pretty much all. We have been recording for 55 minutes. This pretty much sums it up. These were the questions. Hope this was enjoyable for you. Thank you for your questions. Thank you to the 3 of you still watching. Like, comment down below, subscribe, and I do assure you I read all of your comments, all to the very last one. Even if I don't necessarily always respond to all of them, I certainly do read all of them, so comment down below, tell me your opinions. Until next time, this has been Radu, this has been 1000 Words. Farewell.